for the glory of old state, for her founder strong and great, for the future that we wait. Raise the song, raise the song.
Sing our love and loyalty,
Sing our hopes that bright and free.
rest, O Mother dear, with thee, all with thee, all with thee.
Where else would you rather be? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. Welcome to the Penn State Alumni Association's People of Penn State podcast. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State Network. You can find the People of Penn State podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice. Subscribe and give us a rating. Ratings and reviews help others find these great stories. And I'm excited to pass on another great story from another great Penn Stater here today. Today, I'm joined by Brian Anthony Davis. He's an educator, a scholar, an activist, an inspirational speaker. Brian Anthony Davis, he's the Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Ignatius College Preparatory in San Francisco. He's a doctoral student in education at the University of San Francisco, focusing on international and multicultural education with a real focus on racial justice and education. In 2018, he graduated from Penn State's College of the Liberal Arts. He is an unrelenting educator, an award-winning activist, yoga teacher, historian. He's passionate about creating a world of critical thinkers, racial justice advocates, and yoga for self-exploration. Brian was selected to give a TED Talk at TEDx PSU. His TED Talk has won him national recognition for his thoughtfulness and sophistication on issues of inequality, racism, and the criminal justice system. Brian is one of the founding members of Black Ecology Journal at the University of San Francisco, and we are excited to have him on the podcast today. Brian, welcome.
Good morning, Paul. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Hey, thanks for waking up early. We know you are on the West Coast at the time of this taping. Thank you for getting up and for allowing us to pass your story on to fellow Penn Staters.
Yeah, such a pleasure to be here. And I was always looking forward to being on the podcast. So it's a pretty cool experience.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's start right at the beginning. You're from Philadelphia. How did you become a Penn State Nittany Lion?
So interestingly, I came to Penn State on a 7th grade school trip. It was for a big science fair. And that was my first time outside of Philadelphia for the first time. And I was just so amazed at what I saw on campus. We went to the fair was at the Bryce Jordan Center, and those views, big buildings, happy people, right? All of that sparked something inside of me when I was 12 years old, and I told myself, regardless of what happens in my life, I'm going to Penn State. It was the only school I visited like during college or middle school. And I just knew that was a place for me to be. So I told my mom, I'm going to work hard to get that GPA, those SAT scores. And what's interesting is when I was a senior in high school, I ended up applying to Penn State, and I received a phone call from someone from the admissions office, and he told me that they were giving me an option to go to Penn State Altoona first, and then Penn State University Park, so the 2+2 program. And I actually was pretty bummed that day. I didn't that wasn't what I envisioned for myself.
Right.
And what ended up happening was they told me to give them a call back when I decided if that's what I wanted to do. And I had a long talk with my mom, and I was like, I don't want to go. I didn't even know about all the other branch campuses or different campuses that Penn State had. So I never responded. And I told my mom, wow, I might have to consider community college because it's Penn State main campus or no campus for me.
Right.
So I then got into what was known as the CSP program, Comprehensive Studies Program, through the Multicultural Resource Center,
Right.
through the MRC. And, um, once I got in and I came to the summer orientation, I knew I was meant to be at Penn State. So that's sort of my journey. It was um, just that small little trip, my seventh grade year in Philadelphia, that really sparked something inside of me. So.
Yeah, it's really important to get kids on college campuses so that they can start to see themselves being there. And that spark was lit for you as a seventh grader, continued to burn until ultimately you ended up here at Penn State, where from an outside observer's perspective, you took advantage of everything that Penn State had to offer. You got it done in the classroom, but what was most impressive was how you embraced the co-curricular activities and all of the leadership opportunities that are available to Penn State students. Talk about some of those opportunities that you were involved in as a student leader while you were here at University Park.
Yes. So it's so interesting and funny when people look at all of the things that I've done at Penn State. Most people think I was involved since freshman year, and that actually wasn't the case. My freshman year, I was kind of finding myself, right? My graduating high school class was about 60 people. So going to a campus with that many students, it was a little lost, right? Got to find your people, find place, and find opportunity. So there was actually a spark after my first year during the summertime where I sort of found who I was. And I was going through a lot of identity formation. When you get to college, you get exposed to so much. And that bus ride home to Philadelphia, the summer of 2015, is exactly what sort of built up into who Brian Anthony Davis was at Penn State. So that involved a lot of questions about who am I, how do I know, what is my history, what is my relationship to the world, to land, to nature, and who do I want to become? And once I answered those questions, I wasn't satisfied with my answers. And that summer, I began to read so many books. I think I read 100 books that summer because I felt like, I was a straight A student all my life. And even though I had straight A's, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know about my history. And that was challenging. So finding my history and finding other people's history, it gave me a perspective, I believe, that when I did get involved, I got involved with integrity, got involved with that moral conviction, got involved with understanding other students' experience around me who had proximity to me. And then I jumped in. So some of the stuff I was involved with was the Martin Luther King commemoration. I did the evening celebration. It was such a great experience, such a great time. I was the president and refounded the Social Justice Coalition. We sort of did a lot of peace walks, a lot of organizing, a lot of student programming. I also was an RA for 2 years, RA in South Halls. And there was a big initiative, I want to say in 2017, where I seen what was going on with Flint, Michigan. And myself and a few other students, we organized this big drive to collect a lot of water bottles. And we didn't want to stop there. I wanted to actually hand deliver. So we ended up driving from Penn State to Flint, Michigan over a weekend. It was freezing. It was so cold. but that experience in itself, we took about I think we rented, let's say, 4 vans, and we all drove up there. It was was so surreal. That was at the height of the crisis, the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And then just lastly, I was on the Commission for Race and Ethnic Diversity with Dr. Marcus Whitehurst, the commission that President Barron sort of pushed towards the university to increase equity and inclusion.
I'm seeing a trend here in that experiences that you've had kind of unleashed passions that you've had, or big decisions that you were going to make, decisions about your future. I imagine that's going to be a big part of the answer to the next question, which was, while you were here at Penn State, study abroad was also a big piece of your experience. 5 study abroad trips during your time here as a student. Tell us about those experiences and how that shaped what you're studying now, and how that shaped kind of your worldview.
Yes. So I do want to start to say I'm so thankful for Penn State. In 2015, there was a passport caravan initiative at Penn State where they were giving out free passports, right? And I just happened to be in a hub, Roberson Center, and someone walked past me and was like, "Hey, did you sign up to get a free passport?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Right? And for me, I would always go to the mall when I was younger. And anytime you signed up for something, it was almost like a scam, right?
Right.
So I was like, let me just go check that out. And I applied, and the next thing I know, it said I was approved for a passport. And it was just a simple application. What would you do with this passport? How would you benefit from having a passport, and would you anticipate on studying abroad? And I had no intentions at that point, but I told myself, why not? So with all of the student leadership that I was doing at Penn State, it opened up a lot of financial benefit to my education, and it gave me space to begin to expand my education. So we call it engaged scholarship, where you apply what you are learning in the classroom directly to your experience outside of the classroom. And my first experience abroad was with Social 119 with Dr. Sam Richards, and we took an engaged scholarship trip to Haiti, Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And that was my first time on a plane. That was my first time out of the country. And some days I still go back and look at those pictures, look at those videos, and just look at the younger version of myself in that particular moment. And I was so curious, so engaged, but also just processing so much. After that moment, the next year, it was like full storm. I think I did 3 in 1 year. In the summertime, it started with a study abroad in Amsterdam. I was studying the Dutch criminal justice system in comparison to the U.S. criminal justice system. The next one was Australia, I believe. Yes, Australia. That was a class about Indigenous and Aboriginal art and in context to social, political, and economic, just mobility and stability. And then the next one in Curacao was I studied again the Dutch criminal justice system, because Curacao is a Dutch protectorate from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So it's like I almost wish it was like a two-way study abroad, because it was the same system, but contextualizing it in a different way. And I believe I'm missing one more study abroad: Amsterdam, Australia, Curacao, Haiti. Yeah, my memory, I think it's too early. I'm missing one. I'll figure it out though.
That's amazing. Sam Richards is mentioned often on this podcast. He is one of Penn State's favorites. It looks like you remembered the other one.
Yes, Cuba. how could I forget Cuba? Right when the embargo was lifted in 2000 and 2016, with the African American Studies Department, we studied race, gender, and religion in Cuba. How could I forget Havana? Sorry, it's one of my favorite study abroads. I don't know how I forgot that.
This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by scholar, activist, and educator Brian Anthony Davis. Brian, with all of those experiences that you've had around the country and then around the world, you brought those experiences back to Penn State and began to form your own kind of personal thoughts and perspectives, and maybe even more importantly, began to develop a message that you wanted to get out, which led to you being selected to participate in TEDx PSU. Talk about that process and talk about the platform that TED affords to the issues that you're passionate about.
Definitely. Yeah, so studying abroad, it gave me so much space to realize that my individual experience as just a Black man in the United States, as a student at Penn State, was not an anomaly, but something that was ubiquitous. I recognized that students that I met in many different countries were experiencing the same thing I was. And I remember on my study abroad trip when I was in Amsterdam, I took a weekend trip to Paris, and I met a woman on the train who she was working for the International Criminal Court, and we had a 4-hour conversation on the train just about life, about politics, about what's going on in Paris, what's going on in the U.S. And this was at the height of so much stuff with police brutality, and it made me realize that the whole world knew what was going on. And for myself, I recognized that I also had to share that story, share my story. And with all of these different international experiences, I recognized that what like police brutality wasn't just like a U.S. based thing, right? It was something that was everywhere. I seen it partaken in Australia, and in Belgium, right? So when I came back to Penn State right after, this was spring of 2017, so right after my Australia study abroad, TEDx PSU reached out to me and it's like, hey, we would love if you would participate in this opportunity. We see a lot of the work that you're doing on campus, and we would love to have you a part of TEDx PSU. And I was so shocked. I was like, wow, that's huge, right? And these are things that you imagine that you would do this later in life, right? For myself, I'm like, just like traveling abroad, like it wasn't a big thing in my family, and doing it at such a young age, it gives you perspective, right? So for me, I was like, wow, I've done a lot of speeches on campus. I took my CAS 100,
Right.
but nothing to that magnitude. And um, I wasn't really nervous. It was more so like, wow, like this is huge, right? And I didn't know what I was going to talk about at first, right? But I felt like I had to talk about my experience, because when you talk about your experience, it's not something that you have to memorize, right?
Right.
I felt like for myself, if I could, with my like nice little clicker, if I could just put what I needed in front of me, I could share the story as the pictures moved along. And I got a lot of support from a lot of professors on the TED Talk. A fun fact: I only practiced my official TED Talk like twice, and I actually had to change it last minute because I wanted to start with some poetry and end with some poetry. That was a last minute switch, but just the platform, I think it gives you space to be creative about an idea that you have. One day I was just watching basketball and I was just noticing what positions did what. And I was like, I'm a metaphoric person. I think I can get creative here. And I think having creativity and having space to really self-actualize on what you want to do. It gives you space to really bloom into your fullest potential. So I feel like TEDx PSU gave me the space to like just deliver in whatever fashion that honored who I was at that moment.
Before we jumped on the podcast here, I was watching National Signing Day. The day we're recording this podcast, National Signing Day for college football. And every one of the recruits talked about Penn State and the family atmosphere, and that's why they decided to come to Penn State. We've always said it's the people here that make Penn State special. And during your time at Penn State, I'm sure that was the case for you, but you were able to develop a special relationship with Penn State President Eric Barron. How did his mentorship play a role in your Penn State experience and what you're doing now beyond Penn State?
Definitely. Definitely shout out to Dr. Eric Barron. Definitely miss you if you miss watching this podcast. Yes, so we met in 2015 after a protest I organized at Old Main, and brought about, I want to say about 1,000 people out to Old Main. It was we were protesting in support for the Mizzou football team, and someone told me right after our protest was over. I organized a protest at like 1:30 in the morning, and I'm just texting all these people, hey, we meet at Old Main at 12 p.m. We're all black, right? Text that to about 100 people, tell your friends, post it on social media. And I'm emailing professors as well. And right after the protest, I didn't have a plan for after. I just wanted us all to meet, a few people to give some speeches, to talk about our support. And I believe Dr. Marcus Whitehurst came down and said, hey, President Barron would like to meet with y'all now if y'all available. And I was like, whoa, this is huge, right? Because there's sometimes you feel like people in that level of administration are inaccessible, right? Or not available to students. And I realized at that moment, him making himself available said a lot about what type of president he was. So we went up to Old Main, and that was the first time I actually was inside of Old Main. I was like, wow, this is nice. All this artwork, all of these presidents, it's very beautiful. And we met for about 30 minutes, and I told him, I'm really thankful to be here. Introduced myself, talked about a little bit about the work, but I also told him I was going to challenge him as a president to ensure that we are moving forward in the right direction. I love to continue to meet. And Dr. Marcus Whitehurst, he set that up so that we could meet very frequent. And I believe that just having so many conversations with him, having dinner with him, I even organized a monthly lunch with President Barron and other student leaders. I realized that he taught me just the power of patience, one, but also understanding like organizational governance, right? So you can't just like make a decision, right? Like there's a process. And I think sometimes in the beginning of my work as a student leader, and I say this is sort of something that a lot of other folks believed as well, was that things happen so fast, and there's a process for everything, but also understood the importance of how do you wrestle with, having difficult conversations about things that impact students, right? And how do you create space for student voices to be heard? So not only was President Barron giving me access to himself, but allowing me to talk to the board of trustee members, going to Penn Stater to talk to other folks. And it gave me perspective to say that President Barron understood the importance of having students horizontal to the work that he was doing to push and move the university in the right direction.
Yeah, you probably have learned along the way that there are processes in place, right? But that a willing advocate and ally at the top and championing this, like Dr. Barron, helps to move that process along a lot quicker than had you not had an advocate and ally. His experience growing up in the South during the '60s, during the social justice movements of those times, the civil rights era, and him being an activist in his own right during his youth, probably gave you the ally that you needed in the administration to advance some of the things that you were passionate about.
Definitely. You know, a lot of people sometimes they believe and think that administrators don't understand what's going on, right? But a lot of administrators live through these moments, right? And they might not articulate how they feel the same way that a student might, but they understand what's happening. But again, I think just there's those structures in place that sometime, delay the work a little bit. But I believe that I was given the space to energize and mobilize students, but also giving students space to talk with the people in charge, right? Because a lot of our work is horizontal in nature, right? We understand, we educate about our experience, we educate ourselves, you mobilize other students around you who have the same experience, and then you organize. And I think that 3-step process gave students space to, make demands, right? To create institutional changes. And I believe that we were given that power, right? It wasn't something that we were like, oh, this is like never going to happen. They don't want to hear what we have to say, but they came out, they listened, and they gave us space to continue to share what was happening with us and to us at the campus.
So, Brian, you graduated from Penn State in 2018, and we've stayed connected on Facebook and through LinkedIn. And I got to tell you, you've been running 100 miles an hour. You are got a lot going on. Let's start with what you're doing professionally. So, you're the Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Ignatius College Prep in San Francisco. How do you approach topics of equity and inclusion with high school students?
Yes. So it's interesting because I do want to say that high school students are aware of that particular word, just not framed in that lens. But I believe that a lot of students know what's right and what's not right. And I believe sometimes a lot of my work is talking to students about racial incidents that happen on campus. And for me, I can't approach it on a collegiate, like doctoral graduate theoretical framework level, because they won't receive that, right? But when you break it down into their language and their contextual experience, it gives them space to see, wow, that actually that was wrong, right?
Right.
Or I didn't like that, but I'd like to do something about it. So for myself, it's always honoring and centering the person in the experience, right? So if it's an issue around a student not feeling connected to curriculum, that's an issue that I have to address, right? How do we ensure that each and every student has access to who they are in the curriculum, right? For me, it's threefold. I focus on the institutional level, parent and family level, and student level. So student-facing things involve issues between students, issues that students have that are not directly connected to the school, or there's some on social media. Institutionally, help with equitable hiring practices, our strategic plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion, conducting staff surveys to ensure, sort of like a climate survey. And I believe that this is something that Penn State does a lot. And honestly, it's important that I don't recreate or reinvent the wheel. I always, I still to this day reach out to a lot of my mentors at Penn State, Dr. Marcus Whitehurst, Mr. Carlos Wiley, and I reach out to them for support, right? Because they have been in the role for a while. Dr. Marcus Whitehurst has over 20 years of experience in this particular role. So I reach out to him to set up meetings just to make sure that there are things that I'm not seeing, or things that are in the work that are seen as foreseeable challenges, right? So I realize that I'm not doing this work alone, and I think that empowers me to really plan around equity and inclusion. And then as far as our parents as well, we have parent affinity groups as well as student affinity groups. So just supporting them in their identity formation, their institutional change, and just ensuring that they all feel included at the school.
Yeah, you're so right. They might not frame it in the lens of equity and inclusion, right? But from an early age, people know right from wrong, and they know fair from unfair, and students can identify trends, right? Trends that advantage certain people and disadvantage other people, right? And so to frame it in that lens is really smart. It's funny to hear you talk about, not funny, but just really it makes me smile to hear you talk about the mentors that you've had here at Penn State and how you continue to reach back to them. You're going to continue to do that for the rest of your life. And what you're going to learn too is along the way that you're going to turn around and do that for other people who will be reaching out to you, right, as a mentor, which I know in my experience, I continue to learn, right? It's not just when you're a mentor, it's not just all about giving, right? But it's about an exchange, right? And learning from other people's experience. And so I smile to think of what's ahead of you as people start to look to you in that way.
Definitely. For me, I always have to give credit where it's due. There's so many professors and directors at Penn State that really are instrumental to who I am and who I've become, and who have empowered me. I want to say I'm forever grateful for the African American Studies Department at Penn State, because that's where I got a lot of my formation at and a lot of my agency, just from it was a very, very radical, loving, engaging department. It's a very close knit. All of the students, we all took the campus by storm in our own way. And it was all from that love that we got, what we studied, how we were taught to think about the world and think about the text that we were reading. We had a lot of dinners at professors' houses, and those dinners, I mean, it wasn't just about dinner. We would also continue to talk about the work and the books that we read in class, but we felt loved, and we felt like the department supported us, even when we would organize protests, when we would organize rallies. They would be right outside with us. When I organized the Flint, Michigan initiative, we didn't have money for U-Hauls to deliver all the water.
Right.
Department funded the U-Hauls out of their own pockets, right? And they even offered to drive it to Flint, Michigan with us as well. So I understand that just having that level of support, it really allows you to understand where people are. And for myself, that's a big thing for me, being able to give back, to support any way possible.
So you're also a doctoral candidate. You're pursuing your EDD from the University of San Francisco in human rights, international, and multicultural education. Talk about the focus of your study.
Yeah. So, I'm at University of San Francisco now, and my focus is on, like you said, international multicultural education. So for me, I didn't think, but I knew it was certain after a while that I would be in the field of education. All of my Penn State experiences actually led me to this moment. I was supposed to pursue a PhD right out of undergrad. I was in the Ronald McNair Scholars Program at Penn State, right, which is a program that prepares undergraduate students for PhD research and programs. And I didn't take that route. I was so engaged and so organized that God had other plans for me, right? And the job and this is going to connect to grad school, but the job I have now was recruited from Penn State. So they seen all of the work that I was doing as an undergrad, and they wanted me to join the staff. And I recognized when I was looking for graduate schools, the staff at the University of San Francisco, I recognized that I was doing a lot of work that they were doing, but they were doing it on another level. And I was like, I know what type of energy I like to be surrounded with. I like to be surrounded with folks that are moving, that are engaged, or have true scholarship. And I recognize a lot of the professors at USF had that. So that is, that's what led me to that program. And it's been a great experience. The classrooms are very, very horizontal to the extent that um, there's no there's no vertical domination. Like, even though there is a professor, there are students. It's more so we're co-learners and co-investigators and co-conspirators in knowledge and information. I love the structure of the program because it allows me to continue to work and do a lot of my other ventures, but it's all sort of interrelated. So my focus for my master's degree was on human rights education, understanding like what are human rights, how do they apply to us, um, and for me, what's most important is that sort of just epistemology around understanding how can someone know that their rights have been violated if they don't know what their rights are. So I think um, the big thing about that particular program was ensuring that people are aware of what's happening, but also what to do about it as well. And I wanted to extend to the doctoral program because I always had dreams of doing a doctorate degree. One, two, be the first in my family, and maybe 300, 400 years. My family tree goes back to the 1600s. I haven't seen anyone with a doctoral degree. So more of a legacy thing as well. But more importantly, I love school so much. If anybody knows me, like, I will find another degree to do, find a certificate to do. I just love learning, right? So um, the EDD program, it sharpens my tools. It allows me to continue to critically think about the world, and gives me a space to just dream and to imagine new possibilities for the future.
So, one of the ways that academics share information with each other are through academic journals, right? I know many academics, are always in pursuit of being published, right? You are the founding member of a journal called Black Ecology. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and what the focus of the journal is.
Definitely. So, this journal came right on time. Many founded it with four other doctoral students at USF, and what we noticed was there wasn't a lot of scholarship directly related to Black experience, primarily educational scholarship, and it's a lot out there for sure, but we wanted to do something that didn't have the white gaze. And when we say the white gaze, we talk about the ways in which this sort of whiteness structure is centered around how information is distributed, on how knowledge production is established, but also who decides what is scholarship, right? So we wanted to sort of radically move against mainstream scholarship. So it's called a journal professionally, but it's really called an album, right? And articles are called songs. Authors are called writers or producers. We wanted to really um, engage with this scholarship in a different capacity, and more importantly, the second reason why one of my big ideas for the journal was we wanted to give space and accessibility to emerging scholars to publish, right? Because we understand on that level of education, you got to produce, you got to publish research. If you're on the tenure track, that's a requirement, and we wanted to bridge that gap as well. So not only are we published in scholarship, but we also wanted to create space for other people to publish their work as well. So we are international in scope. We look at Blackness not only in the United States but also around the world. So we invite scholars from many different universities. But this is just the beginning. But it was, for me, it was beautiful that it happened so fast. This was an idea that we talked about. We started meeting about this in April, and we finished the journal and had it on a repository roughly by August, right? So we worked diligently over the summer. and most importantly was understanding what is our mission, what is our values, and how do we um, want to not only create space for emerging scholars, but we we're even giving space to undergraduate students to publish in this as well. And it's not just formal papers, it's poems, it's even like small like documentary series. Like we want to engage writers, authors, publishers exactly where they are. So
That's fantastic. It's really kind of any kind of artistic or creative expression, right, around the Black education experience.
mhm, definitely. And all of
So
us, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say all of us had many different experiences with education. Most of us came from, inner city public schools. Um, all of us range from all areas of the U.S. as well. So it's just interesting to see um, this beautiful product that we created, but also just how we continue to expand this project moving forward. So our we and just a little plug. I do have one of my Penn State mentors as one of our first songs that'll be published in the first edition. So I always extend it to Penn State folks because I always just appreciate just having that around me. So look forward to that.
It's what Penn Staters do, right? Great recognizes great.
Yep.
So you have all of this going on, right? And yet you still find time to give back to dear old state. You're a volunteer for the College of the Liberal Arts on a task force charged with recommending practices for how the college can best engage other volunteers from underrepresented groups. Talk a little bit about that task force and maybe what some early findings are, but more importantly, why it's important to give back to Penn State.
Yeah, I'll start with the latter question first. I believe that Penn State is like a pearl. It's something. It's like a clay that continues to be molded, and it's something that you understand that like Penn State gives you the resources to bloom into your fullest potential, right? And when you subscribe to that, when you believe in that, it produces for you. And I believe that you must also produce for it as well. It's not something that, we were talking earlier in this conversation about not just giving or just receiving, but also giving. And I think it's so important that many people, regardless of what class you're in, you had a particular experience at Penn State, whether it was great, whether it was excellent, whether it was satisfactory, or maybe you could have had a better experience, right? And all of what's important about this work is that all of those experiences are valid and are worth understanding more, right? And worth articulating. So when the task force was formed, I realized I'm like, these are folks we're all from different classes that graduated, and folks who were, maybe 10 years ago, or maybe 15, or maybe 5, or maybe 30. We all have different perspectives, but we all can agree that, the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. And I think some people are on different spectrums to how they get to that conclusion, but we are all orientated around the same understanding that this work is important and people want to offer their lens. I think the biggest takeaway is, in my discussions, it's also been hard for me to attend all the meetings, but the ones I did attend, I think our conclusion is that how do we engage with Penn Staters or Nittany Lions who didn't have a great experience? How do we get those folks in the conversation? How do we give them a space to contextualize their experience in a way that doesn't really demonize the institution, but gives a perspective about how we can ensure that maybe this experience doesn't happen again? How do we support future Nittany Lions to the extent that they have an experience that honors who they are, that allows them to be seen, and allows their experience to be centered at the institution?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I've seen a number of times throughout my career and working with volunteers, I don't want to say healing effect, but the step in the right direction that it is with people who might not have had the best experience, when you ask them about that and you engage them in that conversation, and you then show them how the institution has moved forward and show them a way that they can continue to play a part in helping the institution move forward, that is that is something that actually brings those people back into the fold versus having them on the periphery with still some just uneasy feelings about their times at Penn State. Asking people about their experience and asking them to help us to be better has proven time and time again a way to bring Penn Staters back.
And you bring up a good point. I believe that even though you have dates between when you start and when you graduate, you're forever at Penn State, right?
Yeah.
The legacy continues. Your impact will always be there. But more importantly, what I love is that you also, even beyond graduation, even with the Alumni Association, you have ways to still be engaged and still be involved, and those opportunities you can invite yourself to, or you are invited to, right? So I believe that so the reason why I got involved with the task force was because of an alumni event here in San Francisco that Dean Clarence Lang of the liberal arts, he put on here, and I met a lot of alum from many different companies that I actually did some work with, and I was like, wow, like you would have never known, right? And I also believe in the power of how strong our alumni network is. I was planning some events for our STEM students here, and outside of just trying to just find somebody at the company, I just used LinkedIn and found some Penn State folks. And it was just crazy that there was a student that I met like one time freshman year that we stayed connected, but I was going to take my students to Facebook for an event. But it's just the power of just like that Penn State. That's the stitching that brings alum together, right?
We're everywhere, Brian. You're not going to be able to go to too many parts of this world and not be close to a fellow Penn Stater. One thing's been fascinating to me as I've got to know you, and as I did some background research here, is that yoga has played a big part of your life. You practiced yoga, and now you're a yoga instructor. Talk a little bit about how practicing yoga keeps you centered.
Yes. So I was introduced to yoga my senior year at Penn State by one of my friends who lived on my floor. And at that moment, it was a lot of breathing, a lot of movement. And when I moved to California, I realized that yoga was like everywhere. There's a yoga studio on every single corner. So I started practicing, and for me, when I first initially started, it was just a practice, right? And once I learned more about the practice, it became a way of life. And for me, it just transformed so much of who I am. And I just imagine how much more I probably would have been more impactful at Penn State if I was doing yoga my sophomore year and junior year. But yoga really gave me a space to heal, right? I had a lot of stuff built up from childhood, from high school, and yoga really gave me the space to contextualize my experience, to use the yoga mat as a mirror, as a place of refuge, but a space to just be free of social constructions, free of boundaries that I confide in myself to, but more importantly, a space to just explore my body. And after like 2 years of practicing, I told myself, I was like, I want to facilitate this journey for others as well, because it's transformed me so much. So now I probably teach like 10 to 15 classes a week. I love teaching yoga so much, but also just practicing it as well. Just that breath work, the concentration, the movement, but ultimately being vulnerable with yourself. And I think that the world that we live in, doesn't really put vulnerability on a high platform as it should be. So I think it gives me that space to do that.
This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by scholar, activist, educator, and yoga instructor, Brian Anthony Davis. Brian, we like to have a little bit of fun here at the end of each podcast. I'm going to throw some quick hitter questions at you, and you just share the first thing that pops into mind. First, your favorite class at Penn State?
Favorite class, Social 119.
If you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why?
It would be Kenya Barris. He's created Blackish, Grownish. I just love the fact that he continues to excel. Like every time he posts on Instagram, it's another deal. It's another opportunity. And I'm like, I love that.
What is the most unusual we are moment that you've had? Maybe an unusual or unexpected place where either you or someone yelled "we are" to you that you didn't expect it?
I was in Paris and I actually had a Penn State shirt on, and someone yelled "we are," and I was like, Penn State, right? But more importantly, this person, we also took the same class and had the same professor, and we never knew each other. So that was the craziest part. It was so unusual, but that just shows you the power of Penn State.
Absolutely. How about your favorite place on campus?
The Paul Robeson Cultural Center, PRCC.
Your favorite Penn State sport?
Football, by far.
And your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
Death by chocolate.
Death by chocolate.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for being on the People of Penn State podcast. Your story is going to be an inspiration for those who hear it, and we're truly grateful for you allowing us to share it with fellow Penn Staters.
Such a pleasure to be here, Paul, and thank you for all the work that you do. Your role and experience is not easy, and you do it every single day, and Penn State will forever be grateful for you.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
If you like this episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the People of Penn State podcast on your favorite podcast app of choice. And while you're there, go ahead and give us a rating and drop us a review. Help us spread the word. Share the podcast with your friends and with fellow Penn Staters via social media channels, and tag the Penn State Alumni Association with @PennStateAlums. If you're a member of the Penn State Alumni Association, thank you so much for your support. And if you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Go to alumni.psu.edu/join, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thank you for listening and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are.
When we stood at childhood's gate, shapeless in the hands of fate, thou didst mold us, dear old state, dear old state, dear old state.